Hello, and welcome to the Six Figure Developer Podcast, the podcast where we talk about new and exciting technologies, professional development, clean code, career advancement, and more. I am John Calloway.
I'm Clayton Hunt.
And I'm John Ash.
With us today is Robert C. Martin, commonly known as Uncle Bob. Uncle Bob is a software professional since 1970. Robert has spent the last 40 years contributing toward the betterment of the field, from kickstarting the Agile Alliance to authoring landmark books about Agile programming, clean code, and more. Welcome, Uncle Bob.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
So you were back with us on episode 9, and you gave us a little bit of how you got started, but we probably had a lot of people join since then. So do you think you could sort of give a quick synopsis and what really sort of brought you into this industry?
Well, I got brought into the industry a pretty long time ago. My mother bought me a little plastic computer that had 3 flip-flops and 6 AND gates, all mechanical, no electricity involved. And I got fascinated by this silly little machine that essentially is a 3-bit finite state machine that you programmed with Boolean algebra. But it caused me to learn Boolean algebra. It caused me to learn some of the basics of programming, and I caught the bug. And I knew at the age of 12 exactly what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. And it's exactly what I've done.
Very cool. So what are you working on these days?
Well, nowadays, I am spending a lot of my coding time writing in Clojure. That's the language that I use nowadays. I was deeply opposed to any kind of Lisp for 40 years, and then eventually actually read a book on Lisp and thought, this is actually a pretty good language. So nowadays, I like to program in Clojure, which is a Lisp that runs on top of the JVM. I've got a couple of book projects that I'm working on. I just finished the Clean Agile book. I'm starting up the next one, which is about engineering practices. I think I've got one more after that I'm going to do, and after that, the future begins to get fuzzy. And of course, in the meantime, I'm writing blogs and doing videos, and I keep pretty doggone busy.
And I understand you just welcomed a new grandchild into the world?
I am in Baton Rouge at the moment. My 7th grandchild was born a matter of days ago, and
Wow.
And Grandma and I are down here helping out.
Well, congratulations. Mom and baby doing well then?
Oh, everybody's just happy as can be, fine and dandy. And what you're looking at behind me is our motorhome that we drove down here in.
Very cool. Very cool.
So why don't we dive into the new Clean Agile book and what brought that on?
Well, what brought that on was a kind of swelling frustration. The Agile movement began 20 years ago, probably before that. We could probably trace it back to 95 when the original paper on Scrum was published. But I got involved with it late 90s, 98, 99. We did the Agile Alliance thing, that the meeting at Snowbird, that was pretty interesting. And we thought that this was going to be a way for software developers to more efficiently and more informally write software. But over the last couple of decades, the concepts have gotten polluted or complicated or changed or twisted, and I thought it's about time for a back to basics book. Let's go back and remember what this whole thing was really all about at the beginning, and maybe help everybody get back on a simpler track than most people are currently on.
Yeah, I know down in the area where I'm living now, there are a couple of companies that have Agile in the name, and they're selling Agile transformations, and they're very concerned with delivering points to clients and those types of things.
Yeah, so I guess what's happened here is that, first of all, you've got the whole problem of the marketing folks need to differentiate. So you've got companies that are trying to sell one brand of Agile or another brand of Agile, and they put adjectives in front of it, the yellow agile, the green agile, the fussy agile, whatever. There's a bunch of adjectives that get added. And one of the purposes of the book is to get rid of the adjectives. You know, what is agile if you don't have these adjectives? Another issue is that agile was and is a small technique for small teams to develop small projects. And by small, I mean a team of 6 to 8, maybe 12 people. The project size would be corresponding, something on the order of a couple of 100,000 lines of code. That's what Agile was really tuned for. And what we see out there is a huge effort to try and grow that, turn it into something larger, turn it into an enterprise Agile, or a big Agile, or a huge Agile. And I somehow think that's missing the point. Agile was about small teams. Now, how do you do big projects? Well, you do big projects with a bunch of small teams. You don't need special Agile to do that. You just need normal Agile for normal small teams. And then you need to manage those small teams together through techniques that we've always known how to do. We have over the last many centuries mastered the concept of getting small teams to work together. We built pyramids. We went to the moon. We won World War II. That's all a matter of getting small teams to work together. So we know how to do that. What we didn't know how to do particularly well was to get a small group of people to develop a small bit of software. That's where we got all bollocksed up. We got all bollocksed up probably because, this has been a really weird industry. How many programmers do you think there are in the world?
Well, that depends on what you count as a programmer.
Well, count all the VBA programmers. Right? And, the number is large, right? The number is something on the order of 10 to the 8th, 100 million. Maybe it's not quite that large. Maybe it's only 50 million. But it's up there. It's a very large number. But only 73 years ago, there was no programmers at all.
Yeah.
And then there was one, and we could debate whether that was Alan Turing or someone else, but it was, he was pretty early in there on the automated computing engine. And in that period, we have grown from 1 to 100 million. And that's a crazy growth curve. That's a nutty growth curve. That's something like doubling every 2.5 years. And probably they doubled much faster in the first 10 years, right? Because, first there was 1, and then there was 10, and then there was 100. So my research usually says it's something like once every 5 years, the number of programmers doubles. So think back to the 1970s. How many programmers were there in the 1970s? And the answer to that is a few thousand. When I was a young programmer. How many programmers were there in the world? Maybe 10,000. Maybe there were that many programmers in the world. Who were they? Who were these programmers from 1950 to 1970? Who were these people? And they weren't coming out of school. There weren't any university programs teaching people how to do software. So people were already at work. And, a company would buy a computer or rent a computer, and they need somebody to program it, and they'd look around in their organization and they'd find the best and brightest, and typically they'd be in their 30s or 40s or 50s, and they'd tell them, hey, read this book and learn how to program this computer. Early programmers were old. They were older. They were mature. They knew how to deal with the business already. They knew deadlines and commitments. They knew all that stuff, right? And then along comes the 70s. And this crazy growth rate is going on. So we're doubling every 5 years. And the universities have begun to churn out graduates. And who are these graduates? And so first of all, there's this big demographic shift. Before the 70s, a third of the programmers were women. there was just a lot of women in the field. If you go back further, it's even more women. After the 70s, maybe 75, it's almost entirely men. The graduates are almost entirely men, and they're all in their young 20s. So you've got this flood of young 20-something testosterone-driven young men invading the field, and what they lack in experience, they make up for with energy and enthusiasm. My dogs are having a fit back here. Dogs. and so the industry needs some way to get a handle on these kids, and they adopt a process. They adopt waterfall. They adopt some kind of heavy-handed approach to get control over this crazy demographic that they've hired. And it was 30 years. That suppressed us for 30 years. And of course, I was one of those 70s young boys. And then, 30 years later, these 70s young boys are now now it's like 1999, and we're all looking around going, well, what the hell happened to us? And that's when the Agile movement really began. It was the rebellion of that cohort who looked around and said, geez, we've really made a mess of things here. Now, what was it that we should have been doing all along? And that's how Agile began, I believe. And then now it's 20 years later, and we're seeing this funny change to what Agile was, because of the need to continue to grow and continue to develop and do bigger and bigger projects. So anyway, that's why I wrote the book. Long answer to a quick question.
Do you think that even today, because we still are pretty much having the same growth rate, where we have such a huge influx of inexperienced developers, but they're still also on that young age, so they don't have necessarily the maturity of having dealt with the business, having handled deadlines, having done all those non-programming stuff. Do you think that Agile is capable of sort of managing or sort of bringing those people in, or is the industry struggling with still requiring some sort of heavy process, and that's one of the reasons why we see this sort of conglomeration of heavy-handed agileness that people are trying to be?
I think that's a big part of it, right? There are businesses that look at Agile and think, well, this is a pipe dream. You can get these young kids to behave in a disciplined, professional way. Mm-hmm. Look at what Agile is, right? Agile is a set of disciplines and practices that you voluntarily perform. No one can force you to do test-driven development. Nobody can force you to do pair programming. Nobody can force you to deliver, solid deliveries every 2 weeks. That's a discipline that everybody has to adopt as a set of professionals. And if you got a bunch of 22-year-olds in there, maybe that's not going to work so well. One of the big problems we have in this industry is this 5-year doubling, right? Because if you've got a 5-year doubling, it means that half the programmers in the world have less than 5 years experience. And so the entire industry is submersed in this perpetual inexperience. Mm. Where are the mentors? Where are the folks who are going to guide the young 20-somethings through that first critical 5 years when they actually learn how to be professionals? The answer to that is there aren't enough people like that. Mm-hmm. And so companies, to somehow defend themselves, try to build in these heavyweight extra things on top. And the marketing folks and the consulting agencies are all too willing to comply.
Yeah, I remember back in the early 2000s, I was just maybe 4 or 5 years into my career, and the company that I worked for brought in a consulting group to help define our software development lifecycle.
Oh, yes.
And so they spent months and several commas of zeros and money on developing this process. And it was a 12-week cycle of planning and meetings and documentation where they finally brought in development on week 8. And we had 2 weeks to complete it, and then the rest was for testing. So once we abandoned that and moved into more of a collaborative model of developing and delivering value in the form of working software, that's where I really felt great. But I've started to see this trend where it is the heavy-handed agile methods, and we must commit to story points and sprints, and retrospectives aren't that important. They take up too much time, so we'll throw those out the window. So what can we do to get back to basics and get back to being the productive, the collaborative, owning our own destiny?
Well, my solution to that is to publish books and write blogs and travel the world and yell at people as loud as I can. And I do a lot of that, and it's a lot of fun for me. And I look out over the industry, and I am encouraged by the number of people who are craving the ability to act professionally. They've been submersed in the high pressure, super rush mode of software, where they feel like they can't do a good job because all of the constraints are working against them, schedule constraints and the quality constraints, and everything's working against them. So they feel like they must do a bad job. And they go home at night and they look in the mirror and they have to take a shower because of the horrible things they did during that day. And it is encouraging to me to find so many people wanting to get rid of that, wanting to shed that behavior, wanting to do a good job as opposed to a rush job. And my answer to them has always been, you will go a lot faster if you do a good job. You don't have to rush, and you don't have to bend to the will of a manager who tells you that you should not write tests or you should not refactor. In fact, you have a kind of professional obligation, if you want to really go fast, to write tests, to refactor, to do as good a job as you possibly can.
Yeah,
So
recently.
Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, I recently pleaded with the developers that I work with to not let the business's deadlines force them into making those compromises of professional integrity and sacrificing code quality and our standards to meet some unreasonable deadline that the business was setting, just because it doesn't matter how fast we tell them we can get it done, they're going to push for more.
Well, that's been the mindset of the business for a very long time, because the business doesn't really have a trust that the developers can make and keep commitments, right? So if you're a manager and the developers say, well, it'll take us 3 months, you push them for 2. What else are you going to do? And what the developers should do is say, no, 3. Sorry, it was 3, and we can't commit to anything else. We said it was 3. In fact, we're not actually even sure it's 3, but we'll let you know in another month whether it's going to be 3 or maybe possibly 4. Mm-hmm. Because that's the honest truth, not the fake truth of saying, oh, yes, we'll try to get it done in 2 weeks or 2 months or whatever. We've gotten into this cycle of lying to each other, right? The business lies about when they need the date because they're always pushing the date ahead because they don't trust developers, and the developers always say, oh, yes, we'll try, when they actually know they're not going to try anything at all, right? The words I'll try don't mean anything. There's no behavior change that they actually imply. It's just a way of making the boss go away. Yeah, sure, I'll try. Go away. Yeah.
Aside from a handful of jobs in high school in fast food, I've only ever been a professional software developer, so I'm not aware of what are the norms in other industries. But I have to think that if I went into the doctor and said, "Doc, I need a heart transplant. Please do that this afternoon," there are going to be some questions. There's going to be some pushback. Surely other industries don't treat the professional, knowledgeable experts in those fields the way that a lot of developers have felt that they've been treated. Now, whether or not they are or aren't, the perceived feeling of you don't know what you're talking about. This is the deadline. You must meet it. It seems a little odd.
So in our industry, and again, I think this goes back to the inrush of crazy young 20-year-olds in the 70s, because they were generally immature. Because it was my cohort. we were generally immature, and that immaturity has not shifted. We are not hiring generally more mature people today than we were in the 70s. And therefore, these folks that are getting hired do not have the professional maturity to push back on the business. The business can push on them, and they do what kids do. They say, okay, well, those guys know better than I do. Once there is a more mature group in the programming industry, once the programming industry matures a bit, then there will be a lot more pushback. And it ought to be, and maybe this is something that hasn't been learned by the majority of older programmers, but there ought to be a significant pushback from the older cohort saying, hey, guys, business, right? We don't really know how long this is going to take, and you're going to have to manage the uncertainty. We will give you as much information as we can, but the uncertainty to manage is yours. That's why you're managers. Manage the uncertainty.
But it's almost a self-fulfilling prophecy in that there is such a demand for software developers, and there's such an influx of new software developers, whether they're young or just new to the industry, that they don't have that maturity in that position to be able to make those declarations.
Right, because they're just brand new, young, and this all goes back to this 5-year cycle, right? We keep on doubling the number of programs every 5 years. Now, if we're at 100 million now, there's only 8 billion people on the planet. So I think that's, how many more doublings? Just not that many more. And at some point, the half of the world that we're leaving behind, the females, will probably have to be brought in.
So, yeah, I mean, you talked a lot about sort of uncertainty, and I'm wondering if for a period before I was sort of in the software development sphere, I worked as a contractor working on houses, sort of in between things, and that is definitely a place where people again push you to move your deadline up, and unfortunately, I would say that generally speaking, there's maybe a little bit more professionalism in that field, or there can be, where the people are willing to sort of bring that pushback and say, no, it's going to take me this amount of time to paint this room. I can't do this smaller. I can't do it if I cut these corners. It's not going to be acceptable. But one of the things that sort of like I reflect on is the work that is done there is oftentimes more sort of repetitive. Like if I say, okay, I need to build a widget takes so much. It's a very defined thing, and we're going to build 100 of them. It takes so long to build that widget out. If I'm painting a room, there's going to be some variation, but pretty much it's going to be the same procedures over and over, and you can kind of create a pretty good estimation model. When you're developing software or custom solution, you're essentially solving a problem. And so like, how long does it take to solve that problem is a very sometimes undetermined sort of amount. Like the amount of variation, excuse me, the amount of variation between solving one problem to another, it can create a whole new set of obstacles, a whole new set of things that we have to get past that we've never encountered before. Maybe other people in the industry have encountered, and we have to find that information, but we specifically haven't. I wonder if like there are the things like TDD, which are basically a methodology of breaking that problem down into smaller problems to say, okay, here's the sort of prescriptive plan. If following those sort of methodologies or following smaller releases, if that's sort of the key to making the amount of change more predictable and therefore making our estimations and removing that unpredictability, which would allow the business to actually get more, sort of gain our trust, finally trust us on being able to deliver what we suggest.
I don't know if TDD is a discipline like that. Agile certainly is. One of the basics of Agile is that you deliver in 2-week iterations. You deliver in 2-week sprints. and you can measure how much gets delivered in each sprint and compare that to how much still needs to be delivered, and you wind up with a pretty good estimation of how fast you're going. It's a statistically noisy measurement, but over a period of a couple of months, you plot the amount of work that's gotten done on a chart, and you can see a definite slope to it, and then you just extend that slope out and say, well, it looks like we're going to be done next June. That's a pretty reliable, if noisy, measurement technique. The problem that we have as programmers is that we have to instruct a moron on how to conduct wildly complex problems. And the moron, of course, is the computer, right?
Right.
You can't leave anything up to the computer. You must specifically tell it exactly what to do. The problem with that we as programmers have is that the jobs we're asking the computer to do, from our point of view, look pretty simple, right? So, for example, think about how simple it is to tie your shoes. This is something you learned as a kid, right? You can tie your shoes in 30 seconds. And when you think about tying your shoes, it's just a couple of motions, zip, 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 and you're done. Attempt to write down the sequence of instructions for that very simple task. And don't write it down yet. Please estimate first how long it's going to take you to write down that sequence of instructions. And you begin to get an idea of what this problem of estimation really is. We are faced with problems that to us seem simple because we're human, and then to break that down into step-by-step segments is extremely difficult and variable, and estimating that is, a little unreliable, shall we say.
Especially when you include the steps that you forgot were even steps, and you've got to go back and add them in later.
Well, yeah, there is this whole testing problem, right? Oh, it didn't actually tie the shoe. Oh.
So what are the agile technical practices that have kind of gotten lost or clouded in all of the noise and the marketing spiel? Are there things that we should remember to do or remember how to do to go back to being better, more professional developers and delivering software in more simple practices?
Yeah. I mean, there's four, right? There's four practices in the Agile suite, in the engineering circle of Agile, which is test-driven development, refactoring, simple design, and pair programming. And pair programming is the social side of it. It's the way that we do our code reviews, the way that we learn from each other. It's also the way that a team becomes a team, because if someone goes down on a team, the rest of the team can cover for them because they've been working with them all along. Test-driven development obviously is the act of writing tests before you write the code, and the attempt there is to get as close to 100% code coverage as possible. Refactoring is the practice of continuously cleaning the code. You know, it's it's hard enough to make code work. And what most programmers forget to do is clean it after they've made it work. You get it to work, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh God, it works. Okay, don't touch it. Nobody breathe. Just check it in. And you forget the step, which is, oh, okay, it works, but I'm not done yet. I have to clean it up. And that's what refactoring is, to get all the cruft out. And then, of course, simple design is the set of goals for how you drive test-driven development and refactoring and pair programming. The steps for making all the tests pass and making the code as expressive as possible and reducing the redundancy and so on. There are volumes and volumes to be written about this, and I intend to write at least one of them.
Very cool.
So we reached
now,
out.
What happened?
Go ahead.
Where did these go? I mean, when we started the whole Agile thing, way the heck back in 2000, I thought, the Scrum part was pretty cool. Okay, we're going to work in iterations. We're going to talk to the business. That's great. We like that. Okay, fine. But what I was focused on was those engineering practices, that whole test-driven development refactoring thing. That was what I wanted to do. I'm a programmer, right? That's what really thrilled me. And then to watch that decay over the next 20 years and get pushed to the sidelines and to have the other practices, the Scrum-like practices, get amplified over that was deeply frustrating to me, because it seems to me that those Scrum practices, the business-facing practices, cannot be sustainable if you don't have good, solid engineering practices.
Yep.
And the Scrum answer is, well, the team will decide. That leaves me deeply frustrated. Right? Because there has to be a set of professional disciplines that drives the behavior of the technical behavior of the team to do good quality work. Not just, the team will decide, but a set of hard disciplines. And so, again, that was one of the reasons I wrote the Clean Agile book, and why I want to go on to write the next one.
Yeah, I feel like there's a couple things going on there. Businesses don't understand Scrum because the whole world's been playing telephone, and by the time it gets down to your business, it's been completely mutated to where it's not even a real thing anymore. It's just this, we're going to say we're doing it, and that's it. And then with the development side of it, that you're so disheartened with it kind of, decaying. What I think is going on there is your 5-year duplication problem. It takes 3 to 6 months to teach a developer how to TDD, effectively. And in the time that you're doing that, there's been 3 new developers created. You literally can't keep up.
It's like we're rotating in and out the monkeys. The original group of monkeys were shocked when they touched the button, and now our
touches the button.
Yeah, our new developers don't touch the button because when they got there, no one was doing TDD and refactoring and simple design.
Now, is the business really going to pay 2 people to work on the same work on pair programming? I mean, that seems unreasonable.
Those are all the lovely excuses that people do, right?
Absolutely, yes.
It's not the business's business. The programmers get to decide how best to work, right? If the business says, this is really inefficient, the programmers should tell them, well, you business, you can write the code if you want to.
We'll go somewhere else.
Well, there's just plenty of demand out there, so that's not a realistic option.
So before we start to wrap up here, we mentioned in our Slack group that we would be chatting with you today, and our friend Joe Zach from Coding Blocks asked if we could maybe ask about your thoughts on modern JavaScript development, small modules, HTML and CSS mixed in with JavaScript.
JavaScript. Everybody wants to think of JavaScript as something different. It's a different kind of software. It's not normal software. It's front-end software. Software that's not actually normal software. It's just other kind of software. No, it's just regular old software, and all the same old rules apply. Yes, you do things in small modules. Yes, you write tests first. Yes, you refactor. Yes, you isolate. All the design principles still apply. Everything still applies. It's software. Not any kind of special software. It's just plain old software. This is a fight that I've been having for some time, and it's not really focused on JavaScript. It's focused on every new language that comes along, because every new language that comes along is fundamentally different from any other language ever, and all the rules are different now, and we're going to do Angular, or we're going to do reactive, or we're going whatever, right? The rules haven't changed. I've been in this business for 50 years. The rules haven't changed in 50 years. What is software design, what is software architecture, what is good software practice is what was good software practice 50 years ago and is today. we programmers manipulate with our hands a fixed set of instruments, if statements, while loops, assignment statements. That's pretty much it. You could toss a couple of other little class-like things in there, but it all really boils down to sequence selection and iteration. And that hasn't changed for 50 years. The languages change a little bit. Some of the platforms change. Some of the frameworks change. Okay, fine. But those are minor changes. The fundamentals remain the same. I wrote the book Clean Architecture, and the point of that book was that everything has stayed the same for 50 years, hasn't changed.
But with the new languages, we get to make all the mistakes and
all over
figure
again.
figure everything out all over again.
Oh yeah, because it's new. Now that's another one. Have we really seen a new language within the last 30 years? Or have we seen old languages chopped up and reassembled into what look like new languages? Kind of, Frankenstein's monster. It's alive. Bits of other dead languages that get put together into a new language. Has there been any new concept in a language in the last 30 years? And I've struggled to find one. Maybe one or two. But most of the stuff that you find in modern languages, so-called modern languages, was around in older languages, 30, 40 years ago. So we are in this constant hunt for the perfect language. We're always making new languages. And the reason we're always making new languages is that we hate the ones we're writing in. So we have to have new ones all the time. And yet the new ones aren't new. They're just rehashes of old languages. It's an almost futile exercise. And it goes right to the immaturity of the industry.
Speaking of immaturity and industry immaturity, many of our listeners, or at least a good portion of them, are people that are maybe just getting started. They're probably the folks in that first 5 years of their development careers, maybe brand new. And we like to ask all the guests who come on to sort of give them some specific words of wisdom. And so sort of on that note, what would you say directly to them to say, hey, this is what you should focus on to really sort of attain all the things that you're really needing to make yourself successful?
Well, so if you're a young programmer just getting started, what should you do? You should learn as much as you possibly can. You should read old books. Read the structure and interpretation of computer programming. Read Structured Analysis by Tom DeMarco. Read Structured Systems Design by Myler Page Jones. Read all the Knuth books. Go back and read the Fundamental Algorithms book and the Semi-Numerical Algorithms book. Read all these books. Learn as many languages as you can. Learn C, learn C++, learn Go, learn Lisp, learn JavaScript. Learn all these. Don't get hemmed in by a single language. The big risk that a young software developer makes is they get hemmed into Java or JavaScript, the one language, and then they're stuck in that mold and they can't get out of it for 10 years. And 10 years later, that's not a real interesting language to anybody anymore, and they're on this downward track because they're stuck in that mold. So diversify, learn as much as you can. Do not specialize. Learn specialties, but do not specialize. Don't become a front-end developer. Don't become a back-end developer. Do not become a database developer. Learn all those things. Get good at all those things. Software is not a large enough industry to support specialists. We all need to be generalists so that we can understand and communicate with each other very well. Third, do the best job you possibly can at all times. Always tell the truth. Never lie to a boss. Never give an estimate that you know you can't make. Never say that you will try when you know that trying will do no good. Always be as honest as possible. And very often that means that you cannot be specific. When asked, for example, can you get this done by next Thursday? Your answer is probably going to have to be, I don't know. And that's a good answer if it's the truth. Follow some of those rules. I think things will be fun.
Awesome. So we obviously were talking about your book, but do you have any other resources that you might call out for people to if they're looking to get back to the basics of Agile?
Sure. My personal website is cleancoder.com. And if you go to that website, you'll see all the services that I offer to make money. So that's good. Go there and send me money. You'll also see where I'm doing personal events or talks. I do a lot of free talks, so you can go on there and see where I'm speaking and engagements and so on. I also have another website where I sell videos, video lectures on all kinds of software stuff. That's cleancoders.com, the plural of cleancoder.com. And if you go to that site and watch the videos, you'll see me dress up like Spock and Kirk and, have an awful lot of fun while instructing some pretty deep and interesting software techniques and methods.
All right. And then if people want to follow you, is there a social media platform that you are
I'm on Twitter, and it's just Uncle Bob Martin. At Uncle Bob Martin, so you can find me there on Twitter. I interact on Twitter fairly regularly with little spot bits of advice, and I'll yell at people. I try to keep it relatively lightweight. There are a lot of rabid dogs out there I'd rather not attract.
That's fair.
And that's primarily my social networking focus.
Okay.
Related to that, I have a question. Who actually runs the like Uncle Bob's nephew Twitter account or whatever that's always tweeting out like bad code examples and stuff?
I'm not familiar with that one.
Oh, you haven't seen that one? I've
not seen Uncle Bob's nephew. No, is that a Twitter account?
Yeah, it's something like that. I'll find it.
Yeah, I have seen that one.
Okay. Yeah.
Do you have any upcoming speaking engagements that you can kind of shout out?
I'm going to be in Fort Wayne, Indiana, coming up here soon. Don't remember the date. I'm going to be in. Let's see if I can pull that up. I go to cleancoders.com and look at my upcoming events. Here we go. Yes, the future of programming. That'll be at Northern Illinois University on the 16th of October. Let's see. I've got one on the 29th of October. That's in Fort Wayne, Indiana. That'll be a talk about something. Don't know what. 4th of November in Montreal, another evening talk. Another one the 12th of November. That'll be an online talk with Pearson, the O'Reilly site. Let's see, the 19th of November in Fort Collins, Colorado. Those are my talks coming up.
Perfect.
Very nice.
Thank you.
Oh, no problem at all.
Well, thanks, Bob. Really appreciate you coming on the show. We'll let you get back to that new grandchild.
Okay, thank you all so much.
That was Robert C. Martin. Uncle Bob is a software professional since 1970. Bob has spent the last 40 years contributing toward the betterment of the field, from kickstarting the Agile Alliance to authoring landmark books about Agile programming, clean code, and more.
If you like this episode, please like, rate, and review on iTunes.
Find show notes, blog posts, and more at sixfiguredev.com.
And be sure to follow us on Twitter at sixfiguredev.
This has been another episode of the Six Figure Developer Podcast, helping others reach their potential. I am John Calloway.
I'm Clayton Hunt.
And I'm John Ash.